What would you do if you discovered your own child was living like a servant in their mother's house? Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was terribly wrong with someone you love? That nagging voice in your head that refuses to stay quiet, no matter how much you try to convince yourself everything is fine. For Mason Harper, a 42-year-old millionaire who built his fortune from organic farms across the Midwest, that voice became impossible to ignore. While he lived in comfort, his sprawling estate surrounded by acres of green farmland, his bank account growing by the day, his 7-year-old daughter Brianna was living a reality no child should ever face. If this story hits close to home, hit that like button, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. 3 years after a bitter divorce, Mason had respected boundaries. He paid his modest settlement, sent birthday cards, and trusted that his ex-wife Claire was doing her best. Sure, money was tight for her. Sure, she'd moved to a run-down apartment on the wrong side of town. But she was Brianna's mother. She loved their daughter. Right? The contrast couldn't have been starker. While Mason's mornings began with coffee on his wraparound porch, watching the sunrise over his thriving crops, little Brianna was waking up to a world where childhood had been stolen from her tiny hands. While he made million-dollar decisions from his home office, she was making choices no 7-year-old should ever have to make. But here's what haunts every divorced parent. How do you balance respect for your ex-partner's privacy with the primal need to protect your child? How do you know when that uncomfortable feeling in your stomach is justified paranoia or genuine cause for alarm? For months, Mason had pushed down his concerns. The brief phone calls where Brianna sounded tired. The way she seemed smaller somehow during their supervised visits. The excuses Claire always had for why Brianna couldn't stay longer, or why certain questions went unanswered. Then came that message from a neighbor, vague, unsettling, impossible to ignore. You might want to check on your little girl. 6 words that would change everything. See, when you're wealthy, people assume you have all the power. They think money solves every problem, opens every door, fixes every broken situation. But what Mason was about to discover would prove that all the money in the world means nothing when you're failing the person who matters most. The drive to Claire's apartment that Tuesday morning felt like the longest 20 minutes of his life. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his luxury truck as working-class neighborhoods replaced manicured suburbs. Each mile took him further from his comfortable world and closer to a truth he wasn't prepared to face. But what Mason found next would shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman he once loved, and the daughter he would die to protect. To understand how everything fell apart, you need to know how it all began. Mason Harper wasn't born into wealth. He grew up in a cramped trailer on the outskirts of Kansas City, where his single mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Every morning before school, he helped tend the small vegetable garden behind their home, rows of tomatoes and beans that taught him the value of nurturing something from seed to harvest. That garden changed his life. By 18, Mason had earned a full scholarship to study agricultural science at the State University. It was there, in an environmental policy class, where he first saw Claire Donovan. She sat in the front row, passionately arguing about sustainable farming practices, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. She wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant, driven, and shared his vision of changing how America thought about food. Their first date lasted 14 hours. They talked about everything. Their dreams of building something meaningful together, their shared frustration with corporate agriculture, their belief that small-scale organic farming could feed communities while healing the land. Claire wanted to be a social worker, helping families in crisis. Mason wanted to prove that you could make money while making a difference. They were inseparable. The early years of their marriage felt like living in a fairy tale. They rented a tiny apartment above a hardware store, spending weekends driving through rural communities, talking to farmers, learning everything they could. Claire worked part-time at a family counseling center, while Mason launched his first organic farm on 12 acres of borrowed land. Those were the golden days. Coming home covered in dirt, sharing cheap dinners on their second-hand couch, planning their future empire of sustainable farms. When Brianna was born, their joy felt complete. Claire would bring their baby daughter to the fields, spreading blankets under apple trees while Mason worked. Brianna's first word wasn't mama or dada, it was grow. But success has a way of changing people, especially when it comes fast. Mason's organic food business exploded beyond their wildest dreams. One farm became 5, then 12, then a whole network across 3 states. Grocery chains started calling. Investors offered millions. What started as a passion project became a corporate machine demanding constant attention. The man who once came home for dinner every night began staying late for conference calls. The woman who dreamed of helping families found herself alone, raising their daughter while her husband chased bigger deals in bigger cities. Claire begged him to slow down, to remember why they started this journey together. But Mason was convinced that more success meant more security for their family. He was wrong. Comment below if you've seen relationships destroyed by success, because what happened to Mason and Claire happens to families every day across America. The arguments started small. Claire felt abandoned. Mason felt unappreciated. She accused him of caring more about profits than people. He accused her of not understanding the pressure he was under to provide. Late nights turned into separate bedrooms. Separate bedrooms turned into separate lives. The divorce was brutal. Lawyers' accusations, battles over custody that left everyone wounded. Claire demanded half of everything, claiming she'd sacrificed her career for his dreams. Mason, feeling betrayed, fought back with expensive legal teams. In the end, Claire received a modest settlement, enough to survive, but nowhere near enough to maintain the lifestyle they'd built together. She moved into a small apartment across town with 4-year-old Brianna. Mason got limited custody, every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The court said it was in the child's best interest, but nothing about their shattered family felt beneficial to anyone. That's when Claire's world began to crumble. Without Mason's income, she struggled to pay rent. Her social work degree felt useless after years away from the field. She took a job waitressing at a local diner, then picked up house cleaning work to make ends meet. Pride kept her from asking Mason for help, even when the bills piled up and the electricity got shut off. Enter Martha Jennings, a woman who seemed like an answer to Claire's prayers. Martha was older, divorced, financially stable. She offered Claire emotional support and practical help with Brianna. She moved in temporarily to help with expenses, but temporary stretched into permanent. Martha had strong opinions about child rearing, discipline, and responsibility. She convinced Claire that Brianna needed structure, chores, real-world preparation. What Claire saw as guidance, others might have recognized as control. But desperation makes people accept help they might otherwise question. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Mason was reviewing quarterly profit reports in his home office. You might want to check on your little girl. 5 words from Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next to Claire's. No explanation. No details. Just a phone number Mason barely recognized, and a statement that made his blood run cold. He stared at his phone for 10 minutes, reading the text over and over. What had she seen? What had she heard? Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't the type to interfere in other people's business. For her to reach out meant something was seriously wrong. But what could he do? The custody agreement was clear. Claire had primary custody. Mason's visits were scheduled, supervised, limited. 3 years of bitter legal battles had taught him that showing up unannounced would only create more problems. His lawyer had been crystal clear: stay in your lane or risk losing what access you have. Yet as Mason sat in his pristine office, surrounded by awards and certificates celebrating his business success. All he could think about was Brianna's voice during their last phone call. She'd sounded so tired, so small. "Daddy, I can't talk long. I have to help with dinner." At 7 years old, his daughter was helping with dinner at 6 in the evening on a school night. When he was her age, his biggest responsibility was feeding their old dog. Something felt wrong, but he'd convinced himself he was being paranoid. Divorced fathers always worried too much, right? The contrast between his world and hers haunted him. He walked from his office to the kitchen, where stainless steel appliances gleamed under recessed lighting. The refrigerator was stocked with organic vegetables from his own farms. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase on the granite countertop. Everything perfect, everything clean, everything empty. He remembered when this same kitchen had been filled with Claire's laughter, Brianna's sticky fingerprints on the lower cabinets, family dinners around the breakfast nook. Now it felt like a museum, beautiful but lifeless. The internal war raged for hours. Respect Claire's privacy or trust his instincts. Follow the legal agreement or follow his heart. Every responsible voice in his head said to call his lawyer first, schedule a proper visit, go through official channels. But Mrs. Rodriguez's message kept echoing, you might want to check on your little girl. By 8 p.m., the decision was made. Mason's luxury truck felt out of place the moment he turned off the main highway. His usual route to Claire's apartment took him through neighborhoods that told a story of economic decline. Boarded-up storefronts replaced thriving businesses. Chain-link fences surrounded yards where children once played. Street lights flickered or stood dark entirely. Have you ever ignored a gut feeling you later regretted? Share your story in the comments, because what Mason was about to discover would haunt him forever. The apartment complex came into view, a 3-story brick building that had seen better decades, paint peeled from window frames. The parking lot was cracked and weedy. A broken playground sat empty in the courtyard, its swings hanging at odd angles. This was where his daughter lived. Mason parked and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The contrast was overwhelming. This morning he'd walked through his 4,000-square-foot home, past the grand piano Brianna used to play, past the bedroom that still held her toys from their weekend visits. Now he stared at a building that looked like it was falling apart from neglect. The walk to apartment 2 billion felt like a death march. Each step up the concrete stairs echoed in the stairwell. Someone's television blared through thin walls. A baby cried somewhere above. The hallway smelled of old cooking grease and something else, something sour and stale. But as Mason approached Claire's door, he heard something that stopped him cold. Not the sound of a child playing, not cartoons or laughter or bedtime stories. The sound of scrubbing. Rhythmic, methodical scrubbing. At 8:30 on a Tuesday night, someone inside that apartment was cleaning, hard. Then he heard it, a small voice, tired and strained. "I'm almost done with the bathroom floor. Can I please have some water?" Brianna's voice. Mason's hands began to shake. His daughter wasn't playing with dolls or watching movies or getting ready for bed like other 7-year-olds. She was cleaning bathrooms. At night. On a school night. He pressed his ear closer to the door, praying he was wrong, hoping he'd misheard. "You missed a spot by the toilet." "Do it again." Martha's voice, cold and commanding. "But my knees hurt." "Don't argue with me, young lady. Children who don't pull their weight don't deserve privileges." The scrubbing resumed, accompanied by a small, muffled sob. Little did he know, his world was about to crumble in ways he never imagined possible. Mason Harper, millionaire businessman, organic farming pioneer, philanthropist who donated thousands to children's charities, stood frozen outside a cheap apartment door, listening to his own daughter being treated like hired help. All his money, all his success, all his power meant nothing in this moment. His hand moved toward the doorbell, but the sounds from inside made him pause. What exactly was happening behind that door? And how long had it been going on? Mason's finger hovered over the doorbell for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct screamed at him to burst through that door, but years of legal battles had taught him caution. One wrong move could cost him what little access he had to his daughter. He pressed the button. The scrubbing stopped immediately. Footsteps hurried across the floor, adult footsteps, not the light patter of a child's feet. Whispered voices exchanged urgent words he couldn't make out. Then silence. Just a minute. Claire's voice called out, higher pitched than usual, strained with panic. More shuffling. The sound of water running. A door closing somewhere inside. When the apartment door finally opened, Claire stood there with forced casualness, blocking the entrance with her body. Her hair was disheveled, dark circles under her eyes more pronounced than Mason remembered. She wore an oversized sweater that hung loose on her shrinking frame. "Mason, what are you doing here? It's not your weekend. I was worried about Brianna." "Is she okay?" "Of course she's okay. She's getting ready for bed." But even as Claire spoke, Mason could see past her into the dimly lit apartment. The living room was sparse, a worn couch, a small television, milk crates serving as furniture. What caught his attention wasn't what was there, but what was missing. No toys scattered on the floor. No coloring books on the coffee table. No signs that a child lived here at all. "Can I see her?" "She's already in her pajamas. Maybe you could call first next time." "Mummy, who's at the door?" Brianna's voice came from somewhere deeper in the apartment, and Mason's heart clenched. She sounded exhausted. "Nobody, sweetheart. Go back to your room." "But I haven't finished the kitchen yet." The kitchen. At 8:45 p.m. on a school night, his 7-year-old daughter was worried about finishing kitchen work. "Claire, I need to see my daughter. Now." Something in his voice must have warned her that this wasn't a request anymore. She stepped aside reluctantly, and Mason entered the apartment that had become his daughter's world. The smell hit him first, cleaning chemicals mixed with the mustiness of old carpet and desperation. The apartment was immaculate in a way that spoke of obsessive control rather than comfortable living. Everything had been scrubbed until it gleamed, but the underlying shabbiness couldn't be hidden. "Brianna," he called out. "Daddy?" The joy in her voice was immediate and heartbreaking. She appeared in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, and Mason felt his world collapse. His little girl, his baby who used to run to him with grass stains on her dresses and wildflowers in her hair, stood before him transformed. She wore clothes that were too big, hand-me-downs that hung on her small frame like rags. Her beautiful blonde hair had been chopped short, practical but harsh, but it was her hands that broke his heart completely. Those tiny hands that should have been soft from crayons and clay in childhood, were red and raw from chemicals. Her fingernails were scrubbed clean, but the skin around them was cracked and dry. "Daddy, I didn't know you were coming." She ran to him, and he scooped her up, immediately noticing how light she felt. Too light. As he held her, he saw them, bruises on her upper arms, finger-shaped marks that spoke of rough handling. "Hey, princess, what have you been up to tonight?" "I was helping clean the bathroom. Martha says it's important to keep things nice." Over Brianna's shoulder, Mason saw Martha emerge from the kitchen. Tall, severe, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked at him with cold assessment, as if he were an intruder in what she considered her domain. "You must be the father," Martha said without warmth. Brianna was just finishing her chores. Mason set Brianna down but kept his hands on her shoulders. "What kind of chores?" "Age-appropriate responsibilities, something she apparently never learned in your house." Claire stepped between them, nervous energy radiating from her thin frame. "Mason, maybe we should talk privately." No. His voice was harder than he'd intended. I want to know what my daughter's been doing. Brianna, show me. The little girl looked between the adults uncertainly, then took his hand and led him toward the kitchen. What he saw there made his stomach turn. A bucket of soapy water sat on the floor, along with scrub brushes that were clearly too big for child-sized hands. The sink was spotless but showed watermarks, suggesting recent, thorough cleaning. A step stool had been positioned to reach the counter. I do the dishes after dinner, and mop the floor, and clean the bathroom, Brianna said with the matter-of-fact tone children use when describing their normal reality. Sometimes I help with laundry too, but the detergent makes my hands itch. Mason knelt down to his daughter's eye level, his hands shaking as he gently took her small fingers in his. The skin was rough, damaged by harsh cleaning products. These were not the hands of a child, they were the hands of someone who'd been working far too hard for far too long. Sweetheart, how long have you been doing all this cleaning? Since Martha moved in. She says it teaches me to be responsible. She's learning valuable life skills, Martha interjected from the doorway. Too many children today are spoiled and lazy. Real responsibility builds character. Mason stood slowly, a rage building inside him that he'd never experienced before. All his wealth, all his success, all his power to solve problems, none of it had protected his daughter from this. She's 7 years old, and perfectly capable of contributing to the household. Claire works hard to provide for her. The least the child can do is help maintain their home, by scrubbing bathrooms until her hands bleed. I never said, "Look at her hands, Martha. Look at her." But as Mason turned back to his daughter, he saw something that shattered him completely. Brianna was backing away, fear replacing the joy that had lit up her face when he'd arrived. "Am I in trouble, Daddy? I try to do good cleaning. I really do." "No, baby. You're not in trouble. You're never in trouble." Mason knelt down and pulled Brianna close, his voice gentle despite the fury burning in his chest. Over her head he locked eyes with Martha, every word measured and deliberate. "We need to talk. Now." "There's nothing to discuss," Martha replied coolly. "This is Claire's home, and I'm helping raise this child properly. Something that clearly wasn't happening before." That's when Claire finally broke. "Stop it, Martha. Just stop." Her voice cracked as tears began flowing. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend this is normal." The confession poured out like water through a broken dam. Claire collapsed onto the worn couch, her whole body shaking as 3 years of desperation and shame came flooding out. "I was drowning, Mason. After the divorce, I couldn't pay rent, couldn't buy groceries. I was failing her every single day. When Martha offered to help, I thought she was saving us." "I was saving you," Martha snapped. "Both of you were pathetic when I arrived. No structure, no discipline, no sense of responsibility. She convinced me that Brianna needed to learn how to work," Claire continued, her words coming between sobs. "That I was raising her to be spoiled and entitled like rich kids who never face consequences." The manipulation became crystal clear. Martha hadn't just moved in to help with expenses. She'd systematically isolated Claire from friends, convinced her that asking Mason for help would prove she was an unfit mother, and slowly transformed their home into a place where a 7-year-old girl carried the burden of adult responsibilities. "Every time I questioned it, Martha reminded me how much money we saved on a housekeeper," Claire whispered. "How Brianna was learning skills other kids her age didn't have. But look at her hands, Mason. Look what I let happen to our baby's hands." Mason's phone buzzed. Detective Samuel Briggs, his old college roommate who'd become a family friend, had been discreetly investigating since Mason called him on the drive over. "I need to step outside for a minute," Mason said carefully. "Brianna, why don't you go get your favorite book? I'd love to read to you." As his daughter scampered off, Mason stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Sam, what did you find?" Enough to be concerned, not enough for immediate removal. No obvious physical abuse, but clear signs of emotional trauma and age-inappropriate responsibilities. The neighbor's been documenting things for months, taking photos, keeping notes. She's got evidence. What are my options? Legally, it's complicated. Claire still has primary custody, and technically, having a child do chores isn't illegal. But this level of responsibility, the condition of her hands, the emotional state, a judge would definitely be interested. And practically, that's trickier. A custody battle could take months, maybe years. Meanwhile, what happens to Brianna? Foster care. More trauma. Sometimes the system creates more problems than it solves. Back inside the apartment, Martha was packing a bag with aggressive efficiency. "I don't need to listen to this hysteria," she announced. "Claire, when you come to your senses and realize that child needs structure, you know where to find me." She was gone within 10 minutes, leaving behind a silence that felt both relief and devastation. Claire looked up at Mason with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be her mother anymore without Martha telling me what to do." "We'll figure it out," Mason said quietly. "Together. If you know a child in need, don't stay silent. Like and subscribe if you agree that protecting children is everyone's responsibility. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in courtrooms with lawyers and judges. Sometimes they're fought in living rooms with broken parents who need help remembering how to love without causing harm." The question wasn't whether Mason could win custody. The question was whether he could help rebuild a family that had been systematically destroyed by desperation and manipulation. That night changed everything, but not in the way most people would expect. Mason Harper could have destroyed Claire's life. With his resources, his lawyers, and the evidence Detective Briggs had gathered, he could have won full custody within months. He could have made headlines, "Millionaire saves daughter from neglectful mother." He could have let his anger drive every decision. Instead, he chose a different path. "Claire, when's the last time you saw a counselor?" The question came 3 days later, as they sat in his kitchen while Brianna played in the backyard. Actually played, for the first time in months. Claire looked up from the coffee he'd made her, confusion replacing the exhaustion in her eyes. "I can't afford." "I'm not asking about money. I'm asking about you. When did you last take care of yourself?" That conversation became the foundation for everything that followed. Mason didn't just offer financial support, he offered something much more valuable. He offered Claire a chance to remember who she used to be before desperation made her decisions for her. The healing wasn't fast or easy. Claire started therapy twice a week, working through the trauma of their divorce, her financial fears, and the guilt of what had happened to Brianna. Mason helped her find stable employment as a family counselor at a non-profit, work that reminded her of her original dreams of helping people. Meanwhile, Brianna began the slow journey back to being a 7-year-old girl. The first time Mason heard her giggle, really giggle, not the nervous laugh she developed around Martha, he had to step outside his kitchen door to wipe away tears. Her hands healed. The bruises faded. But more importantly, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something beautiful, the confidence that comes from knowing you're unconditionally loved. Within 6 months, they'd established a new routine. Claire kept Brianna during the week, but Mason was involved in homework, school events, and bedtime stories via video calls. Weekends were shared more equally. Most importantly, all decisions about Brianna were made together, as a team. "She's not cleaning bathrooms anymore," Claire told him during one of their weekly check-ins. "Yesterday I found her building a fort out of couch cushions. There were books everywhere, and she was laughing at her own jokes." That's when Mason knew they'd succeeded. The life lessons from this story run deeper than most people realize. Money can't solve everything, but compassion can heal wounds that courts can't touch. Sometimes the strongest action isn't the loudest one. It's the choice to extend grace when you have every right to seek revenge. Children don't need perfect parents. They need protected ones. They need adults who choose their well-being over pride, who build bridges instead of walls, who understand that healing a family requires patience, not just power. Community matters more than control. Claire's recovery wasn't just about individual therapy. It was about rebuilding connections with friends, neighbors, and support systems that Martha had systematically destroyed. Second chances aren't just for children. Sometimes broken adults need them too. Today, 3 years later, Brianna is 10 years old. She's on the honor roll, plays soccer, and has paint under her fingernails more often than cleaning chemicals ever touched her hands. When people ask her about her family, she says simply, "My parents love me." Which brings us to the most important question of all. What would you do if you suspected a child in your community was carrying burdens too heavy for their small shoulders? Would you speak up? Would you act? Would you be the voice that child desperately needs to hear? Because sometimes, being a hero is as simple as making one phone call.